Welcome everyone to this discussion today. And before we begin, I'd like to let you know that this panel will last altogether around 60 minutes, which consists of 45 minutes of moderated discussion with our experts, and the last 15 minutes will be allocated to the Q&A. And first of all, I like to ask you all just to keep our answers short and to the point, so we can hear as many perspective as possible and stay within our time frame. So let's begin. My first question to you is, how can governments and international institutions strike a balance between strengthening national economy resilience and preserving the benefits of global cooperation in trade?
Well, that should probably mean I get to give the shortest and easiest answer, and things will get more difficult as it goes down that way, I think. No pressure. Look, I think it's a perennial problem, and coming from the Australian perspective, I think we have had to deal with this set of challenges now for the best part of 20 to 30 years, which is to try to strike a balance between maintaining robust trade relationships, given that the Australian national economy is heavily trade-oriented, but at the same time recognise that that there are national security concerns. Speaking again from the Australian experience, I think we've managed to achieve, and I don't know if this is extendable to other nation states, so I don't want to suggest that this is necessarily a pathway, but the most important issue has been to firstly ensure that there is a robust global set of trading rules that enables a trading nation to navigate difficulties should they exist at a bilateral level, and Australia actually relied upon an open global trading regime only about 3 or 4 years ago when market access to China was curtailed. The second thing that is important is to be perennially mindful of the need to monitor where potential risks are in supply chains. And at a national level, we undertook an assessment about 4 years ago of potential supply chain vulnerabilities to determine the extent to which there are genuine risks, as opposed to knee-jerk reactions as to what possible risks people might perceive there to be. And the detailed assessments showed, in fact, that of just about every category of product that Australia imports, no more than 2 were ones in which the country did not have alternative supply options. So having a clear picture of what it is that you do, what it is that you need, what it is that you, the extent to which you have options is critical. And provided that you have clarity around what the reality is, as opposed to what your fears might be, then you're ultimately in a better position to navigate this balancing act question.
So thank you so much. I have to thank Observer Research Foundation and also the Hungary Institute of International Affairs for the invitation. And from my perspective from Cambodia, I think international governments, all governments, will need to balance between their strategic national interest with that of the region and of the global community. But first of all, depend on your national economic interest. You cannot just give in to, the geopolitical competitions that sometimes driven by some major powers for their national interest. From my perspective, we look at some ASEAN member countries. They are very good at managing those political competition and also the external pressure from certain countries, including from the US. On the one hand, some countries benefit a lot from Chinese investment. Right? They stay quiet, and then when their national interest and the interests of their allies, major allies, coincide, they stay quiet, but they target those other countries that are called non-friendly countries. That I think, why don't we try to promote more international cooperation in a way that benefits can be shared among smaller, middle, and larger nations. Why do countries need to commit themselves to the lose-lose global race or race for global dominance at the expense of many countries? Given the recent imposition of tariff on many countries around the world, right? Including Cambodia, 49% of tariff has been, I think, imposed by Trump administration. We rely about, I think maybe, let's say this, put this, around 40% of Cambodian total export, around 40% of the total export go to the US market. And if they want to, the US want to calibrate that foreign trade policy, but they should target those countries that give them economic leverage, economic benefits, because trade make, I think we talked this morning, we heard the speaker this morning, and also yesterday too, Eric said that the rise of China has also given, the growth impetus for many countries, including the US, Australia, European countries. But so my thought is this: with trade, because geopolitical powers and dominance is mapped out by how much trade volume is. If you look at the trade statistics, Chinese export to the world dominate, maybe more than account for 60% of the global trade activity, right? And then in this case, maybe we try to slow down a little bit on geopolitical competition and cut down on over securitization. I think I agree somehow to Professor Warwick on in certain instances we have to pay a lot of attention to the national security. On one hand, technological development sometimes come quietly and then protruding or affecting national security. But I have seen a lot of narratives and articulation of security concerns, and at the same time they spend so much time and energy on security, and then it goes nothing, it goes nowhere. But then China quietly have been developing their technological capacity. We used to talk a lot about a trade war between China and the US over the past 20 years and more recently over the past 10 years or so during the first Trump administration. But China quietly moved up the industrial and technical ladder to now promoting more automation used by AI. And then AI will drive the global trade and competitiveness. So before I end my remark, I think maybe countries should focus more on international cooperation in technological areas, and then identify where your strategic sectors are and work together. I give another example. Germany is quietly working with China, particularly on the auto industry, the auto makers. BMW is investing and cooperating with Chinese automakers. Have you heard about that? So many. They produce 600 cars per factory, just per factory in Chongqing. And that is how smart Germany, the BMW, has been in working closely and also quietly to benefit, to take advantage of technological capability of China. And why the US, why Western world should pay more attention. You cannot win because of the demographic dividends China has. 1.5 billion equal to the whole Africa. So it's one country in Asia, the population is, the whole Africa population is just amount to the population of China. So population 4.7 of around 5 billion people in Asia alone. How could you win Asia? So I think, but in this case, I think maybe country need to work more on promoting your technological capability in certain sectors or industries, or co-opting with some country, not specifically with China, but with Korea, with Japan, with Malaysia, with some other country for your economic interest. So I'd like to end from where I start. Thank you.
Yeah, I recall when the financial crisis broke out. I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that if you're talking about the financial plumbing in an economy, you know something's gone really wrong. It's something like real plumbing that you don't really want to know much about. And it feels like the securitization debate is somewhat similar. Of course, there are security concerns in the economy, but they should be limited to very, very limited sectors. Military, very sensitive military materials, by the way, like nuclear or something like that makes a lot of sense. Uranium sourcing, stuff like that. But, if you think you're going to really withhold the printing press, I mean, it didn't work out too well for the Catholic Church. They got the Reformation. That's the case with most consumer technologies. So if you're talking about security, you're probably doing something wrong. It should be something done in dark military planning rooms and not talked about very much, actually. I know that sounds kind of blunt, but it's true. It should be a very limited activity in a planning system, but it's not anymore. And even in terms of how we're doing it, it's kind of nonsensical. We put out a paper at the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs a while ago where we compared the basic capabilities of NATO economies and BRICS economies, not because we wanted to foment the bloc division that's taking place. We don't. It's exactly the opposite a reason that we put it out. But it was very illustrative because, to my mind, okay, if you think about technology and so on, like what technologies can go into military production? Well, it can be anything from optics, okay? It can be optics, it can be high explosives, or it can be steel. It can go right down to steel. And so if you look at the input on like an aircraft or an artillery piece or a missile, like everything's dual use in it. So if you start like picking the whole thing apart and saying, well, we need to control each part of that supply chain, it's like going crazy, right? It's like trying to count the number of grains of sand on a beach, in a sense. So the way I'd approach it personally is to focus on the very sensitive issues like arms control, the usual things that we used to not talk about and we just kind of assumed were done. And then if you're really concerned about your actual security, you probably want to just tick a couple of boxes. First is food security, second is energy security, and then maybe third is basic inputs. That's debatable, but you're talking about maybe basic steel inputs, stuff like that. Now, the enormous irony of what's happened in the past couple of years is we're all debating what parts go into a missile, but in Europe, we don't even have access to cheap energy. This gives rise to a number of ironies. Another one, we say, well, we want to rearm because we think the Russians are going to invade or something, but we don't have cheap energy, so our plant and machines our plants, our industrial plants are shutting down. Audi's shutting down in Germany. Well, how are you going to build any tanks without input from any energy sector or whatever? So it's almost like I don't want to sound too facetious about it, but the securitization debate has turned everyone kind of into an armchair economist, and lo and behold, they focused on the wrong issues. From a national security point of view, the first things you should want are access to food, energy, maybe basic raw materials, and then you probably want a reasonably good industrial economy. We thought for a long time that you didn't need an industrial economy for war anymore. Wrong. We know that now. But we're not focused on that. And I guess that brings back to the initial point of what kicked off the entire securitization debate. Everyone thinks it was kicked off by the Ukraine war. It wasn't. It was kicked off in 2016 by the election of Donald Trump, where Donald Trump got elected on a platform of reindustrialization that had very little to do with military. It had to do with American voters being sick of not having access to good industrial jobs. He gets elected on that, and let's call a spade a spade. The national security state saw that as an opportunity to try and funnel money into the military-industrial complex. That's exactly what happened in America. And so the MAGA movement was attempted to be steered in this securitization direction, which is everything from decoupling to de-risking and all this stuff. That has nothing to do with reindustrializing America, or if it does, it's tangential. It's tangential. So this is what's happened. We've got ourselves into this terrible rut. I think we overdid free trade for a long time. I think that's kind of consensus now. We overdid free trade. And then we tried to correct, and the initial correction was American voters aren't happy, we want reindustrialization. And that went through the Washington incentive sieve. And what came out the other side was decoupling, de-risking, some sort of national security strategy, and this strange focus on minutiae of what goes into an F-16 fighter. And then what comes out of that? A bunch of tariffs, and America waking up to the fact that China can shut off gallium exports and shut down their entire electronics industry. And I mean, I don't mean to sound facetious or like a know-it-all or anything, but I'm sitting there like, I've been talking about for 18 months that they can shut off your gallium. But no one's listening because they're having these bizarre debates amongst themselves about all these like minutiae in the supply chain or whatever it is, when the basic questions are actually much simpler. Just on the gallium point, and I'll finish on that just to give a sense. If you want gallium, you need an aluminium or aluminum, as the Americans say, facilities, okay? That's how you get gallium. It's a byproduct of aluminium processing, the processing of bauxite ore. Okay, you can't get that overnight. If you want to see how long it took the Chinese to build up their aluminium processing capacities, it's probably about 10 years, it might be 20. But no one's even laying out a plan for that. And so you're at a point where you're like, okay, everyone's talking about these minutiae of where the optics come from on, an F-16 or on a rifle. And, the economists will step in and say, well, you want to be very careful with that because all these rare minerals, they're not even rare, they're actually very common, but they're byproducts of industrial processes. All these now come from China. And then, you engage in tariffs to try and do this de-risking strategy, and then suddenly, oh look, you don't have any gallium coming in, you don't have any germanium coming in. Rare earth metals are now threatened because the processing facilities are all in China. And it's actually even quite hard to get the ore. You have to go out to Central Asia if you want an alternative for the ore, and then you have to get it processed. And so none of these things were discussed. So I think if I were to summarize what I just said, I'd be very skeptical of securitization narratives. They shouldn't be public debates at all. They should be very private, behind-door debates. They should be very limited. And in fact, I strongly believe that the military planners should have very limited input on that because I don't think they understand anything about this. And then finally, if you do want to focus on your national security, start with the basics. Start with food and energy. Maybe basic inputs then, maybe. And then have a decent debate about how much industry you want in your economy, because industry is ultimately going to be what produces weaponry and machinery and so on.
Now I'm already in the lucky position I can actually comment on previous comments. But I think Philip and I, we have pretty much the same starting point. The teaching of Smith and Ricardo is not overnight just become wrong, right? And if we are accepting this starting point, then we would probably also see that states or regional integration organizations have always put their individual national or regional interests first. However, for a long while, that was globalization. Globalization served certain economic players best for their national interests. And now we've seen a reassessment that globalization leads to the problem that your runner-up is coming closer and closer. And somebody in the Americas has probably felt the breath already in the neck. So they have basically shifted to a different strategy, and this is this strategic competition. And I think that's not a process which I would basically pinpoint to 2016, because when you look to the United States, they have been developing economic security tools for, I would say, even decades, and they have at their disposal a huge arsenal of instruments. Just the latest are outbound investment screening. Inward investment screening they have been doing for a long while. Tariffs are old school, maybe not in the way as they are used today, but all those are instruments in a toolbox of a nation state to pursue its interest. And now the question is really, since we have not really mentioned the European Union, and we are here in the European Union, what's in our interest? So if it's true that trade actually generates wealth and prosperity, I think we see very well that this is a model which, at least for the European Union, has been working very well. I mean, look to Hungary as a success story. And Hungary is so successful because it's a member of the European Union. We should not forget that. How do we allow for this level of integration? It's trust. It's trust among each other. Of course, it's in some days a bit stronger, and the other days a bit less strong. But overall, we are trusting each other. And the problem beyond the European Union is that trust is significantly, let's say, challenged, especially in the transatlantic relationship, but also towards other players. So what can we do as a European Union? The European Union, I think, can do two things. They can, in particular, deepen integration, being a space where people, goods, services, capital is freely floating around. This creates prosperity. And then engaging on various levels with those partners where we can create the sufficient level of trust to liberalize. I think I stop here.
So it's obviously it's a very important question. What should governments, what should countries do right now? If you would have asked this question a year ago, or 6 years ago, or 18 years ago, then I would probably have agreed with what was mentioned before. The two gentlemen before me were talking extensively about the economic issues, and I also agree with you that if you look at what makes sense for a country, then obviously connectivity, what Hungary is doing right now, that we want to trade with every potential partner which is out there. So we would love to export, we would love to import, we would love to trade with others. That makes sense. So that is what makes sense. That is what is good. That is what has caused the great moderation from the 1980s, when inflation stayed low, whereas growth rates were strong. So there was strong economic growth in the whole world, and inflation figures were quite low. On the other hand, you asked the question today, and today we have a different setting, in my opinion, because if this question is asked, I also think that we have to distinguish between bigger and smaller countries, or bigger and smaller players, because a big country or a big player will decide what's the game. So whether we are playing soccer, or it's table tennis, or something else. And then the small players, they have to adapt. They have to understand what is the new game, what are the rules, and then we have to play the game the big players decided we have to play. And right now, as I see, the US has decided, and when they decided, this is a good question, but it seems that right now there is a decision, at least for this presidential term, that reindustrialization of the US and dealing with the with the huge trade deficit of the US is a very important goal for them. So this means that the strategy of the US is determined by their perspective, by their desires. And there is China, which was very successful in this free trade environment. Even if you look at the total exports, even more successful recently than the US, who invented the game, let's say. And obviously for them, for China, it would make more sense to play the old game because they are, they have the best players right now, it seems, from some perspective. So this is their interest. But the interests are colliding right now. And then we have the European Union, and it's a good question. What is the strategy of the European Union right now? If there is any strategy or any visible strategy, please let me know. But I think it will be very, very important to decide what we want to do, or at least to adapt to any of the two big players. Unfortunately, I don't really see a good strategy. And in some areas where I do see some decisions which were made, then these were not necessarily the best decisions. That the decoupling from the Russians related the energy, it makes very little sense in my opinion. But otherwise, I don't really see what is the strategy of the European Union. And I think that if US will play the game what US is intending to play, then obviously it sets the stage, it sets the rules, and then Hungary for sure, but I think also the European Union has to adapt to this game. And even if this strategy of reindustrialization and focusing on strengthening the domestic production is quite the opposite of what we have seen before when the world was doing free trade. We will see higher inflation figures, in my opinion. We will see smaller growth rates. We will see the situation will be worse if we look at the employment, the wage growth. So it's not good news if this is the new game, but we have to adapt and we have to try to maneuver to have as small negative consequences and possibly also some positive consequences as well.
When I can directly come back to what's the strategy of the European Union, I think the strategy of the European Union is a balancing act, as we all trying to undertake, and I think it's actually is the famous 3 Ps: partner, promote, and protect. So we are trying to promote innovation in the European Union and competition on the internal market, because actually the only real way to protect ourselves against malicious actors is being highly competitive, because this generates economic power, and this is where we can do more in Europe, especially by clearly restricting existing barriers to trade in the European Union. Partner, I think the European Union is continuing to engage worldwide with quite ambitious trade deals, and you can also see that the appetite for trade deals has significantly been increasing over the couple, let's say one year since the Trump administration, Trump 2 administration is in office. So certainly this is also actually a good news. And protect, there are basically a flood of measures trying to address the various security concerns. And I'm happy that the European Union is not decoupling, but is trying basically to de-risk. This is a very sensitive approach, trying to find various partners to deal with. I wished my own country, Germany, would have done so earlier when it came to Russian gas. So I mean, we had to learn this lesson in a very hard fashion. I wish everyone that they don't have to learn this, and I hope they are economically that strong to survive that lesson.
Just quick, and I will be very, very brief. So promote, partner, protect, yeah, obviously, it sounds great. But if you look at the actual situation, you said promote innovation. If you look at any innovation measures, how well is Europe doing compared to China? How well is Europe doing compared to US? I don't know any figure which shows that we are doing. We always say that we want to improve this, we want to be the best out there, but unfortunately numbers are not really proving that we are successful in this. Partner, yeah, but if you ask Russia, if you ask China, even if you ask the US, whether we are always the best partners for them, I don't know what their answer would be. And protect, I mean...
Russia is a very difficult partner right now.
Obviously, yeah. For Russia, I totally understand. I totally see the point. But okay, but with whom we are partnering right now? So I don't really see our big partner with whom we have a good relationship.
Americas is doing actually quite well.
Yeah, we received some tariffs as well as an act of partnership. Okay, so
Americas. Not
Americas. Okay. Then I
an
understand. Okay, you're right. Yeah. And protect. I mean, we were not very successful in protecting the European Union against inflation, against a drop in the GDP, or I mean, a negative influence on the economic growth. So, and I have some fears that we will have some problems protecting Europe from war as well. We were not really doing well in that as well. But I hope you're right.
We're building tanks now in former Audi factory.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's move on to the second round. I'd like to ask you that how do you think in this complex situation which you have just described from different angles, how can in this situation emerging markets and the new and upcoming non-Western alliances such as the BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and such, how can they navigate in this landscape? What can be their strategies, and how do you think actions of Western countries, including the American tariffs and the various foreign policy and economy policies of the European Union, impacting these countries and these organizations?
Before diving into it, I just want to reflect a little bit on what Philip said earlier about gallium. In September 2023, when China first announced that it would require applications for exports of gallium, I was on Al Jazeera with some American interlocutors, and they basically said, "Oh, that's all meaningless, nothing." And I commented at the time that this was actually a very subtle message, and perhaps China needed to be more explicit. Because if the Americans couldn't understand a subtle message, then maybe they need to have a very direct message before they got the message. And what we've seen in the last 3 weeks is the direct message, right? And that is that China will strangle supply of critical minerals if need be, despite efforts to present the message in a subtle way, which is, let's have a discussion about what your objectives are, and let's see if we can't come to some common understandings about what our objectives are and how perhaps we might be able to help each other get to where we want to go. And funnily enough, middle of last year, during the campaign, President Trump actually made some remarks at a motor vehicle town where he talked about the impending bloodbath on the American auto industry should China's electric vehicles hit the US market, but in less reported remarks also said maybe he'd welcome Chinese manufacturing. The problem with trade is actually a production problem. You can only sell what you make. Trade is a symptom of whether you're of what kind of an economy you have. It's not the cause of the kind of economy that you have. And if you spend 40 to 50 years creating a financialised economy, then what you'll export are financial products, otherwise known as American dollars and financial instruments and IOUs. That's what's happened. And so the attempt to reindustrialise America is in many regards a fool's errand. And this gets me to, I guess, where the BRICS countries and others are coming from now, and that is that these are countries that have experienced the benefits of trade, and they've begun to experience the benefits of capital mobility and the development of productive capacity. Importantly, it's also involved the development of energy security and a growing degree of energy sovereignty. I appreciate the comments made by our German friends about energy, because without energy security, you're always going to be vulnerable to external pressures. Energy and food security are the foundation stones of a sovereign community. Right? People need food and machines need fuel. It's pretty simple. BRICS supports that amongst its members and then enables them to trade meaningfully with each other, to grow the diversity of their economies and to expand the complexity of their various respective economies. You'll notice that over the course of the last 10 years, the economic growth rates of BRICS members and the rate of trade growth amongst BRICS members has surpassed that of the traditional advanced economies. BRICS nations and the wider global south will continue to experience rates of economic growth and rates of trade growth that are greater than those that the advanced nations are going to experience. Which leads to a view from the world of BRICS, and that is there is no desire to cut off trade and capital flow relationships with the advanced world. But if the advanced world, the transatlantic powers, choose to cut themselves off, then there is only so much that BRICS and the Global South can do about it. They've articulated the voices very clearly over the course of the last few years that they believe that severing trade relationships is to the disadvantage of all parties. But I think it has reached a point, an inflection point historically, where their capacity to persuade has reached the bottom, and their willingness to persist in persuading the first world that these decisions are not in either party's interests has also reached rock bottom. BRICS economies will continue doing what they do. They will continue to expand their trade relationships. They will continue to expand their investment relationships. And if the global north detaches itself from that, then that's an unfortunate byproduct of the anxieties that the global north is now experiencing. And that's a shame for the world, but there's only so much that the global south can do to persuade the global north that there are better ways.
Thank you for the question. I think one thing we should take into consideration is that power is relative and it is dynamic. It keeps changing and evolving all the time. To put it into comparison, two countries can never grow at the same time. I mean, two major countries. So when one country is rising, another is relatively declining. So we have to agree that on that point. I think for other countries, I do agree with the points Professor Warwick just mentioned. So, if the Western powers are trying to cut or to push other countries, particularly the international groupings by BRICS, away, they will get stronger because you give them the upper hand in grouping and regrouping at a greater scale by themselves. We have seen over the past 6 months when the BRICS country was trying to establish its own currency. Yeah, but until today, it's not working yet, because I think maybe BRIC member countries are still trying to stand on different ground. You look at the individual BRIC member countries. They try to benefit from the West, they try to benefit from Africa, or from America, or from China, from Russia at the same time. I mean, China as well, they're trying to promote more, and they are still now trying to figure out whether the BRIC currency will have to be developed and to put into circulation. So in this regard, I think we should not, I think countries should not push or should not impose too much restrictive measures, including sanctions on other countries. But we have to calculate that sanction very, very well. Of course, sanctions can be applicable, but we have to calculate that very, very well. Otherwise, countries would be pushed away, and then regionalization and also the fragmentation of trade and investment promotions. And at the same time, it put the benefits of global population at risk or at more disadvantage as countries try to protect their technological advancement to their own interest and their own grouping at the expense of what humanity. I think maybe when we talk about the word humanity, some countries may shake their heads because they just want the benefit of their own country, not the benefit for the other country. So I think as a global opinion thinkers, as a leaders, we have to think about the benefit of other country, because if you try to cut the tie or you impose too much pressure on a smaller state, for example, my country, we have other options. We suffer for a short time, but we have many other options around in the region to promote greater cooperation. For example, like now, we diversify our trade relations with India, with the Middle East, with UAE, with Australia, with New Zealand. Because why? Because the West tried to impose a lot of pressure on us. I give an example, the real example. 10 years ago, I was working to, and then I was working to support another government, not my government, but I was hired to us. They say, the West, European Union, do not want to work with a communist country. But then, 3 years ago, they signed a trade agreement with a communist country. And then I ask, why? You switch it from your narrative that you are not working with a communist government into making a trade deal and agreement. The response, because we see the economic benefits. You see, this is how we can see your arguments has always changed, and then how could the world trust you? And if the European Union want really to recalibrate your leadership, global leadership or international leadership, you have to be very sure that what you talk today and the next 10 years will be the same. That is how we call it integrity, right? Because personal integrity, global integrity transcend time and space. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to probably echo what the other two speakers have said. To the question, the BRICS don't really have to do anything. The BRICS are doing fine. It's the West that's in stagnation. The West is in stagnation. Why are we pretending it's not? Europe's got the worst of it. It's got no growth at all. It's had inflation over the past 5 years. Living standards have fallen. You want to look at food prices in France over the past 4 years? I mean, I think we're in denial about all this stuff. I find it bizarre, but we are where we are. The BRICS are doing absolutely fine. And as Warwick said, and I think Mr. Cheng said as well, they're getting kind of tired of the lectures because they don't actually have to rely on the West anymore. The West has no growth. So there's, you can trade with the West, but the trade isn't growing. And if you look at Chinese trade, for example, it's mainly increased with the global South over the past 5 years. It hasn't increased with the West because, I'll say it for the third time, the West, for the most part, isn't growing. So we're in this strange position where we're saying, like, oh, well, what should the BRICS do when faced with the belligerence of trade wars and so on? They don't really have to do anything. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but the most aggressive form of trade war possible was waged on Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. Like, complete cutoff, right? Well, I haven't been to Russia since the war, but I know some people who've been to Russia since the war, and the Russian economy is functioning. We can debate what its inflation rate is, whether the ruble's fallen too much, what interest rates are like, but you can buy most things in Russia. The Western consumer goods have mostly been replaced by Chinese consumer goods and domestically produced food and so on. That's just the reality, and I'm only saying that not to say, haha, your sanctions didn't work. They didn't work. But I'm saying that because the rest of the world, I've spoken to people all over the world about this, in China, everywhere, Vietnam, everywhere, and they've looked at the Russian experiment, if you want to call it that, and they've said, well, worst case scenario, we can live without Western products now. We don't need Bosch anymore. We can get Chinese white goods. We can get cars from China. We can get electronic vehicles from China. China don't weaponize their trade. So if you guys are going to weaponize your trade, we'll go with the other guy. And you don't even need an organization called BRICS to do that. You just trade with the person that doesn't weaponize your trade. It's almost automatic in a sense. So I'd only echo from a very kind of Anglo-Western European point of view, because apparently it's not being done at the moment, what Warwick and Professor Cheng have just said, that this, we're not being viewed in the world at the moment in the way that most people in Europe think we are. And if we don't kind of come to that recognition very soon, we're going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble. The last thing I'd say is the way we are viewed in Europe at the moment is basically as a demand sink. That's kind of how bad we've got. I know this I don't want to beat up on it too much, but it's kind of infuriating. Basically, when you talk to other, you have an honest conversation. I don't mean the kind of, you actually talk to people properly. Europe is only really envied for its market right now. That's pretty much it. That's not a great place to be, and the tariffs and so on that we're putting on electronic vehicles are only making that worse. Don't ask me. Ask the CEOs of our car companies. These must have been the first tariffs in human history that weren't lobbied for by the industry. The industry lobbied against them. If you take an economics class, they'll tell you tariffs are there because greedy, politically connected monopolies come along and lobby for tariffs. No. The European Commission imposed tariffs, and the car makers said, no, do not do that, because we'll completely lose our competitiveness, and we won't be able to sell into foreign markets. And you'll go over to New Delhi, or you'll go over to Buenos Aires or something, and there won't be Volvos anymore. There'll be BYD. All the CEOs knew this, and they actually lobbied against the tariffs, but they imposed them anyway. So, I mean, that's kind of more of a rant in a sense against the West, but the BRICS don't have to do anything. And if you talk to people properly in those countries and you actually listen rather than, giving lectures, if you actually listen, they're pretty much saying that. And Europe especially, but America as well, have slipped into this sort of coma or something where they're saying, oh no, it's absolutely fine. And then you say, but your economies are stagnant, you have inflation, you have high interest rates, you have financial chaos. Oh no, it doesn't matter, it's fine. It's completely strange, but BRICS don't have to do anything. And I seriously think this. Hungary's obviously taking a completely different path. So that's a different story altogether. But if the West doesn't figure out what it wants out of trading and economic relationships in the world by 2030, it's going to be in a very, very, very bad place.
I don't know, Philip, whether I got that right. Are you saying China is not weaponizing trade? Was that the point, the claim you made?
That's how it's viewed in the world.
Okay, interesting. I partly to differ on that. But irrespective of that, I think Warwick made a very important point to kick off the response to this question. It takes two to tango.
From a especially EU perspective, I think the European Union, its common commercial policy should really, and then I'm very much with Philip on that, should stop lecturing. Yeah? That's I think a very important lesson which we are just about to learn right now. I think that would create the one or the other additional opportunity. We have an attractive market. This is 500 million roughly consumers, and how attractive it is to trade with that market. Our British friends can experience in global Britain right now. And they are just lucky that we have a war. So we need the defense capacities. But that aside, my point really here is less ideological, more basically fact-based, driven trade partnerships.
So there are two questions. What will the impact be, and how can emerging markets navigate? The impact will be obviously negative on each and every country, in my opinion. So obviously, as we have discussed, free trade was good for the economies in the world, and obviously if we move to more segmented markets, it would be bad for the economies, higher inflation, lower growth. So it's a bad thing, and I think this is the reason why the car manufacturers, the German especially, were lobbying against the tariffs, because obviously it was not their problem that it will be easier for them to sell cars in Europe, but the problem was that they knew that there will be countermeasures which will hurt them. So this is the problem, that the impact will be negative. And if we focus on the world outside of the US, then if the US succeeds in what they are aiming to do, to bring back some industrial production and decrease the trade deficit, then obviously the other countries will have the other side of the coin, so they will be impacted as well. So the global industrial production outside of the US has to be smaller if they are able to bring back some industrial production, and also the world outside of the US, they will have a smaller trade surplus, obviously. So there will be negative consequences for the rest of the world outside of the US, and somehow they have to distribute these negative consequences. So some countries or some regions will feel more negative consequences, and some countries and some regions will feel less negative consequences. How can countries navigate? Obviously, there is this route, which was partly mentioned, that if the US, or if, let's say, the European Union is not replaying that game, but if somebody is slapping you with some tariffs, then you slap them back. Okay, so there is obviously this way that you can play the classical game tit for tat, that if they hurt us, we will hurt them, and then we'll see what comes out of this game. We already saw that with China and US, with the tariffs approaching or even exceeding 150%. So that is probably not the right path, in my opinion. But it will be hard to have some other strategies. So I think that it's a very good question. What can emerging markets and even more advanced economies do in this situation? It will be very hard, in my opinion, to play this game, because nobody played that in the recent past. So we have to figure out a strategy for ourselves. And another thing is, which was mentioned here, that it's easy to retaliate. If somebody steps with tariffs, you also increase your tariffs. It's very easy to play this game. But on the other hand, what I see right now, it's not just so the tariffs are used in a very, very new way, a very innovative way, in my opinion. So what we can see right now, it's not just the US is increasing the tariffs, but US is playing with the tariffs. The US is creating a big uncertainty with the tariffs, not necessarily slapping tariffs, slapping countries with tariffs, but say, okay, right now I increase the tariffs, and tomorrow I decrease it, and then for 90 days we go back to the previous situation, and then something else happens. So there's a big uncertainty. And as another country, as another player, you cannot really say that the US is hurting you with tariffs, because most of the tariffs were not introduced. But on the other hand, if you play this game, if you increase the uncertainty regarding tariffs, it has exactly the same effect as having tariffs at the end of the day. Because if you look at a company which operates in a big supply chain, and you know that you have some other companies in other countries from which you buy stuff, if the tariffs are high, obviously it's a problem for you, the costs will increase, and you will try to bring back some of these production steps to another country where the tariffs are lower, or to your own country where there are no tariffs. But you do exactly the same if there is a big uncertainty with tariffs, because you don't know what will happen. You don't know whether if you import stuff from Cambodia, it will be with 40% tariffs or 0 tariffs or whatever. And then what you do as a company, okay, you also bring your production back to countries where you think that the tariff rates will be lower, or the uncertainty will be lower as well. So right now the US is playing this uncertainty game, and it's very hard to do anything with this game, because it's not actual tariffs, but it's just increasing the uncertainty.
Thank you very much for your very thought-provoking and intriguing opinions. Now we have to move on to the Q&A, and I'm turning to the audience. We still have time for some questions. First, I'd like to ask everyone who's asking a question to please first introduce yourself by telling us your name and organizational affiliation. And as our time is limited, please keep your questions brief and to the point.
Thanks for a wonderful panel. My name is Stephen Nodge from the International Christian University, where I'm a professor, and I'll be with the Hungarian Institute for International Affairs. So one intervention, Philip, I thought the characterization of China not using its market to coerce was just completely crazy. Ask the Lithuanians, ask the Canadians, ask the Australians, ask the Japanese, South Koreans, Taiwanese, Southeast Asians. They clearly have a long track record of doing this, but at the same time, we should be very clear: the Americans are doing this now. So I think it's just not intellectually honest to say that the Chinese aren't doing this, but we should say the Americans are doing this right now. I guess my question is really, with this trade and transition and tariffs and the next global economy, how are we envisioning the next global economy? Because some good friends talk about kind of a barbell, where the China is one economy that connects many economies, and the US is another economy that connects many economies, and there's a small link between the two economies where trade occurs. So I'm interested in terms of thinking about the countries that you represent. How are you going to negotiate this, I think, very reasonable picture of where the global economy is going? From Cambodia's perspective, or Australia's perspective, or Germany's perspective, or even Hungary's perspective. How are we going to negotiate this? Because it really takes, it's not just about saying I'm into connectivity. What is the practical process of negotiating two separate worlds? Thank you.
I'm not the decision maker in the case of Hungary, so this is just my opinion. But I think for smaller countries it will be easier. So obviously, if you look at what the US is trying to do to bring back industrial production, to decrease the trade deficit with a small country, I mean, it's not having any significant impact on these goals. So I think for a small country, I hope it will be easier to navigate amongst the big players. But obviously, it's not for sure, because I mean, we were living in a communist system earlier. I was living for a lot of years in that system, and in that system, even for smaller countries, you had to follow the rules. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think the important thing to bear in mind is that we're not dealing with symmetries. The United States market actually is nowhere near as important today as it once was. It represents less than 15% of global imports and declining. The other point to remember about the United States economic structure, and this is a paradox given its stated concerns and its anxieties around whether or not it makes things, is that American manufacturing today is roughly at the same level as it was about 10 years or so ago. The United States actually makes things. The issue is what does it make? And why is it that people fret over this question of manufacturing? The United States makes high-end medical equipment. It makes high-end transport equipment, industrial machinery to some extent, certainly agricultural machinery. It makes pharmaceuticals. It makes weapons of war, a lot of them. Its military-industrial system is the best funded in the world. America makes things. So why is America anxious? What's the politics of it? In part, of course, it's about the jobs that were lost over the course of 50 years. But they're not coming back. That's a con job. The United States is anxious about the fact that the goods that people experience in their daily lives aren't made down the road anymore. I get that. Right? The car that I drive, the bed sheets that I take off in the morning, the clothes that I wear, the shoes that I put on, the books that my children take to school, the pens and pencils that they use, they're not made in America anymore. They're made somewhere else. But is America going to make those things again? It can certainly choose to. And should it insist on doing so by pushing tariffs to a point that makes it uneconomic to import those products, then it will guarantee you that the United States economic structure will simply move to a comparatively higher cost plateau. That is the inevitable result of the current policy settings. And should the United States choose that setting, then it'll just be a more expensive place to live. And it will have distributional consequences. Wealthy people won't feel it at all. Inflation is a distributional problem, not an aggregate problem. Wealthy people will experience inflation actually in positive ways. Stock values will continue rising. Real estate asset prices will continue rising. Rents will go up. The people who will suffer will be the people who voted for this path of action. Okay, so that's the first thing to remember, is that we're not dealing with symmetries. The issue around where does this all end up over the next 5, 10, 15 years is what kind of social settlement does the United States ultimately sees itself? Because all we can do, and I'll speak wearing in a sense two hats, from an Australian point of view, the first hat, all we can do is maintain our support for an open global trading regime, which is precisely the regime that made it possible for Australia to rapidly navigate out of the trade restrictions that Australia experienced in relation to the Chinese market 4 years ago. Without an open trading regime, Australia would have been trapped. And the experience actually, in terms of the way that the Chinese market has been turned on or off like a tap, is that those countries that have open trading relationships around the world and have diverse distribution channels are the ones who cope well. Right? So that's a lesson in that. When I wear my Global South hat, again, I simply say to the Americans and to some extent to my European friends, think very clearly about the futures that you want and do so without reliance on nostalgia, but on the basis of the resources that you have, the kinds of economic and social systems that you want to create, and the ways in which you want to see benefits distributed across your societies. The problem with trade, to the extent that it causes industrial disruption, is that the benefits are aggregate in nature. Right? Every economist can tell you the story of Ricardo and Smith. The lessons are in aggregate. So everybody gets the benefits of access to lower costs and optimal pricing and all those sorts of things. But the losses are concentrated. And they're visible, right? But at the end of the day, if you allow the losses, which actually are concentrated amongst the minority of the population, to determine a policy framework that impacts the majority of the population, then you will ultimately lead your societies down a dead end, right? So, my general attitude on these issues is, to the extent that trade matters, and it matters to different degrees for different countries and regions, ensure openness, ensure diversification and options, right? But don't turn your back on the optimization benefits that come with trade, because it is a dead-end path. It is the primrose path of economic policy. And but the world has changed, and advanced economies are going to need to adapt to it.
Just please keep your answers very, very short, because we have only very, very limited time now.
Okay, thank you. I think for the case of Cambodia, as a small country, we are in a disadvantaged position to weather the storm, because our economic power is small, the size of economy and the size of the population is small. But we try to accommodate these changes, to take advantage of the close proximity and long historical relation with China, with ASEAN. ASEAN is one of the major powers, economic powers of the world. 670 million people. The population is greater than Europe. Economy is growing faster, at a much faster pace than any other region of the world. So we try to promote intra-regional trade, and also to integrate in the greater regional economic grouping, like the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, I think where India opted out. Before, I think maybe India should be rejoining RCEP as a 15-member regional bloc. And then now we have Hong Kong, we have Chile, and also Sri Lanka. But in the very near future, Pakistan will be expressing their interest, and several other countries. So we try to promote trade cooperation among the region to weather this storm. Of course, it's very difficult to deal with the US government, because they keep changing policy. So my recommendation is that to ensure two things. One is policy consistency of a country, small, big or small. You have to ensure policy consistency. But we did not see this after Trump 2.0. Tariff change like my fingers over a period of 5 seconds. Change, and then investors lose confidence. How could America reindustrialize with that uncertainty? So great uncertainties that tariff change within a period of 5 days, and in some time 5 seconds within the mind of the policy or politicians. So policy continuity and consistency is very important for a country to promote the investment. You bring in technology investment to the country because of your policy constitution. Second is about institutional vibrancy. The institution, because I think maybe institution in terms of how you coordinate, how your institution from different trade, foreign policy, industry, science and technology department, human resource department, whatever, work together in a very coordinated manner. I give an example. China has done that since 1978, after it opening up the reform in 1978, until you have seen this faster growth in terms of technological development. Not overnight, it didn't happen overnight, but because technology has a power, as an inherent power, it can be made, you know, it can promote its inherent growth by itself more explosively in an exponential manner. So now I think it's hard to beat China in at least for another 20 years. But with the rise of other emerging economies like India, like in the region, in ASEAN, we have Indonesia is also emerging very fast. I think maybe European countries have to pay attention to those emerging markets as well. And then, like I said from the beginning in the first question, responding to the question, why don't you work with those countries in certain areas? Hungary has did it with China in terms of AI, you know, promotion of AI in the auto industry, for instance. Do look into those strategic sectors. Thank you.
I'm very, very sorry to interrupt you, but unfortunately we ran out of time. So I encourage the audience and you to continue this informally and ask your questions. Thank you for your attention and thank you for attending this panel discussion.